The origins of the epic. Have you ever wondered what came before time, before kingdoms, before heroes, before even the idea of good and evil? Long before history began, when silence was the only sound in the universe, a great story was already waiting to be told. A story of destiny, of love, of betrayal, and of divine design. This story would one day become the Mahabharata, the longest epic ever written. A tale so vast that it is said to contain everything that has ever happened, is happening, or will happen again. Tonight, as you close your eyes and drift toward rest, we'll travel back to the dawn of this ancient world, to the moment when the seeds of the Mahabharata were first sown. In the beginning, there was no earth, no sky, no sun, no moon, only an endless ocean of existence, and within it, the spirit of creation itself. From that infinite stillness, the creator Brahma emerged, carrying within him the blueprint of all things yet to be. The gods, the stars, the rivers, and the mountains began to take shape, and among them rose a sacred land, Bharat, the motherland that would one day become the stage of the greatest story ever told. Upon this land stood the kingdom of Hastinapura, destined to be ruled by the mighty Kuru dynasty, whose fate would change the course of the ages. But before kings and wars, before the Pandavas and Kauravas, there was a river, the celestial goddess Ganga, whose waters flowed between heaven and earth. King Shantanu, ruler of Hastinapura, once saw her standing by the banks of the river, radiant and serene, her beauty unlike anything he had ever witnessed. Overcome by love, he asked her to be his queen. Ganga agreed, but on one strange condition. He must never question her actions, no matter how cruel or confusing they seemed. Desperate to have her, Shantanu promised, and thus began a marriage both beautiful and tragic. In time, Ganga bore him 7 sons, but with each child's birth, she carried the newborn to the river and drowned it without a word. The people whispered in horror, yet Shantanu, bound by his vow, said nothing. Only when the 8th child was born could he no longer contain his anguish. "Stop," he cried. "Who are you, and why are you doing this?" Ganga turned to him with tears in her eyes. "You have broken your promise," she said softly. "But since you have spoken, I will tell you the truth. These sons were the 8 Vajas, celestial beings cursed to live as mortals for a sin they committed in heaven. My task was to free them from their curse. Only this last child must live his full life on earth." With that, she vanished into the river, leaving Shantanu heartbroken, but holding his only son, the boy who would grow into Bhishma, one of the greatest warriors and wisest men the world had ever known. Bhishma grew up with the strength of a god and the wisdom of an old soul. When he spoke, even kings listened, and when he took his bow, entire armies trembled. Yet his heart carried the weight of destiny. For the sake of his father's happiness, Bhishma once swore an oath so powerful that it would echo through generations. He vowed never to marry, never to claim the throne, and never to seek pleasure or power. He did this so his father could marry again, a woman named Satyavati, whose children would inherit the kingdom. That vow, made in selfless love, would later become the root of both greatness and tragedy for the entire Kuru dynasty. From Satyavati's line came 2 sons, Chitrangada and Vishitravirya. Both died young, leaving no heirs, and thus the kingdom once again faced the threat of ruin. In despair, Satyavati called upon her firstborn son, the sage Vyasa, the very man who would one day compose the Mahabharata itself. Vyasa, born of divine energy and gifted with sacred wisdom, agreed to ensure the continuation of the dynasty. From his union with the widowed queens were born 3 sons, Dhritarashtra, blind from birth, Pandu, pale and noble, and Vidura, wise and virtuous. These 3 would become the pillars upon which the great story would stand. As the years passed, Hastinapura flourished once more, but beneath its golden surface, the threads of destiny were already tightening. The blind king Dhritarashtra ruled with his mind clouded by love for his ambitious sons, the Kauravas. His brother Pandu, cursed never to touch his wives, prayed for children and received 5 sons by divine blessing, the Pandavas. These 2 families, bound by blood yet divided by desire, would one day face each other on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, a war that would decide the fate of the world. And so the stage was set. The gods watched in silence. The river Ganga flowed on, carrying whispers of what was yet to come. The Mahabharata, a tale of kings and queens, of courage and downfall, of duty and sacrifice, had begun its eternal journey. As the stars shimmered over the sleeping earth, destiny itself began to move, step by step, toward its inevitable end. Now, take a slow breath. Let your mind wander to the banks of that ancient river where a king once fell in love with a goddess, and where a promise changed the fate of an empire. The story has only just begun. Close your eyes and let the echoes of the Mahabharata guide you deeper into the dream. The births and curses. Every great story carries with it the weight of choices made long before its heroes were even born. The story of the Mahabharata is no different. The destinies of the Pandavas and Kauravas were written not in their own lifetimes, but in the generations that came before them. Their paths were shaped by love, ambition, and above all, by the mysterious force of karma, the echo of past actions that ripples endlessly through time. As the sun set over Hastinapura and the river Ganga whispered softly through the plains, unseen hands were already weaving the next chapter of fate. After Bhishma's legendary vow of celibacy and his father Shantanu's death, the throne of Hastinapura fell to Bhishma's stepbrother Chitrangada. But his reign was short and quiet. The gods had other plans. Soon he was slain in battle, and the crown passed to his younger brother, Vishutravirya. The young king was brave but naive, unprepared for the burden of rule. To secure the future of the Kuru dynasty, Bhishma sought wives for him and in a daring act of valor rode forth to the kingdom of Kashi. There, 3 princesses Amba, Ambika, and Ambalika were being courted by many noble suitors. Bhishma, sworn to protect the dynasty, stormed into the gathering, defeated all challengers, and carried the 3 princesses away in his chariot. What Bhishma did was not out of lust or pride. It was his duty. Yet, as with all deeds touched by fate, even noble intentions can lead to sorrow. Amba, the eldest, confessed that her heart already belonged to another, the king of Shalva. Hearing this, Bhishma, bound by righteousness, sent her back with honor. But when Shalva rejected her for having been taken by another man, her heart filled with rage and despair. She turned her anger toward Bhishma, swearing vengeance. For years she sought a way to end him, the man who had unknowingly destroyed her life. Amba's fury would one day return in another form, as destiny's weapon against the mighty Bhishma himself. Meanwhile, Ambika and Ambalika were married to King Vishutravirya. For a few years, peace returned to Hastinapura. But soon, Vishutravirya fell ill and died without leaving any heirs. The kingdom once again faced the threat of extinction. The people whispered of bad omens, of how the line of Kuru, blessed by gods and heroes, now stood on the edge of disappearance. In her sorrow, Queen Mother Satyavati remembered her son from before her marriage to Shantanu, the sage Vyasa, born of her union with the great seer Parashara. She sent for him, for only he could restore the royal bloodline. Vyasa came, his presence quiet and filled with divine authority. He was no ordinary man. His face glowed with the peace of deep knowledge. His voice carried the calm of 1,000 meditations. When Satyavati told him of her plea, he agreed, but he warned her that his presence was austere, that those unprepared for his ascetic power might find him overwhelming. Still, the queens Ambika and Ambalika agreed to participate in the sacred custom of niyoga, through which heirs could be born to a deceased husband by a chosen holy man. That man was Vyasa. When Vyasa entered Ambika's chamber, his presence was so intense that she closed her eyes in fear. From that union was born Dhritarashtra, strong and proud but blind from birth. In Ambalika's turn, she turned pale upon seeing the sage's appearance, and her child Pandu was born with a pale complexion, his name itself meaning the fair one. A third union was arranged, but the maid sent in place of the frightened queen faced Vyasa calmly and respectfully. From her was born Vidura, wise, intelligent, and virtuous. Though born of a maid, his wisdom would one day guide kings. Thus the three pillars of the coming age were born: Dhritarashtra, Pandu, and Vidura, each marked by their mother's reactions, each carrying within them the seeds of their own destiny. The gods watched quietly, for they knew the Kuru line had been saved, but not without consequence. As the princes grew, the differences between them became clear. Dhritarashtra, though blind, possessed the strength of 10 men and a heart full of ambition. Pandu, calm and thoughtful, showed skill in war and wisdom in rule. Vidura, though not destined for the throne, was perhaps the most gifted of all. He understood Dharma, the law of righteousness, in ways few mortals ever could. In time, Dhritarashtra was married to Gandhari, a princess from the distant land of Gandhara. When she learned that her husband was blind, Gandhari made a vow that shocked the court. She blindfolded herself forever, choosing to share her husband's darkness. It was an act of devotion, but also of quiet defiance, a statement that destiny would not favor one over another. The gods, moved by her sacrifice, blessed her with 100 sons, a gift that would one day turn into a curse. Among them was the eldest, Duryodhana, born under ominous signs, a cry that made wolves howl and the wise men tremble. Meanwhile, Pandu was married to 2 princesses, Kunti and Madri. Kunti, noble and serene, carried a secret from her youth. In her girlhood, she had served the sage Durvasa, who, pleased with her devotion, had granted her a divine mantra. This mantra allowed her to summon any god and bear a child by him. Out of curiosity, before her marriage, she once invoked the sun god Surya, and from that divine light was born Karna, her first son. Fearing disgrace, she placed the newborn in a basket and let him float down a river, praying the gods would protect him. Her secret would remain buried for years, until the truth would one day tear hearts apart. Years later, when Pandu accidentally killed a sage while hunting, he was cursed never to embrace his wives again, for if he did, death would strike instantly. Heartbroken and exiled to the forest, Pandu renounced his throne and sought peace in simplicity. But his wives longed for children, and remembering Durvasa's gift, Kante revealed her secret. With Pandu's blessing, she invoked the gods one by one. First, Dharma, the god of righteousness, who blessed her with Yadishthira. Then Vayu, the god of wind, who gave her Bhima, strong as a storm. And finally, Indra, the king of gods, who granted her Arjuna, destined to be the mightiest archer in the world. Madri too was blessed when Kanti shared the mantra with her. She called upon the twin gods, the Ashvins, and bore Nakula and Sahadeva, the twins known for their grace and wisdom. Thus the 5 Pandavas were born, sons of gods raised by mortals, destined for greatness. Far away in Hastinapura, Gandhari's sons grew under the shadow of power and envy. Duryodhana, proud and fierce, felt the kingdom was his by right. When he learned of the birth of the Pandavas, noble, divine, and beloved, jealousy burned in his heart like fire. Even as a child, he could not stand the thought of being second to anyone, not even his cousins. The seeds of rivalry had been planted, watered by pride and destiny, and so the story deepened. The sons of Pandu and the sons of Dhritarashtra, cousins by blood but rivals in spirit, were growing toward a future none could escape. The gods had placed them on opposite sides of the same destiny, and all of Bharat would one day tremble at their conflict. But for now, in this moment, the story rests in its stillness. Two families blessed by divine power, yet shadowed by curses and ambition. Somewhere, the river Ganga still murmurs against the stones, whispering of what lies ahead. For though peace reigns for now, fate is already moving quietly in the dark, preparing for the trials that will test the heart of Dharma itself. So as you close your eyes tonight, imagine the ancient city of Hastinapura, bathed in the soft light of dawn. Imagine the young princes growing up together, laughing, training, dreaming, unaware of the storm their lives would one day summon. The story of the Mahabharata has only just begun, and destiny is waiting patiently for the hour when brothers will rise against brothers, and the world will never be the same again. Childhood and early rivalries. The city of Hastinapura was alive with the sounds of joy and promise. In the courtyards of the royal palace, the air rang with the laughter of young princes, their playful voices echoing through the marble halls. To the people of the kingdom, these children were the hope of a new era, the future of the Kuru dynasty. Yet, hidden beneath their games and lessons, something darker was taking root, an invisible current of jealousy and pride that would one day tear their world apart. The five Pandavas, Yudhishthira, Bhima, Arjuna, Nakula, and Sahadeva, grew up under the care of their mother Kunti and their father Pandu, until fate called their father away forever. One afternoon in the forest, while Pandu and his wives were resting, the curse that had long hung over him struck without warning. Overcome by emotion, Pandu embraced Madri, forgetting the sage's warning. In that single moment, the curse fulfilled itself, and Pandu fell lifeless. Madri, stricken with grief and guilt, chose to follow her husband into the flames, entrusting her sons to Kunti's care. The Pandavas, still very young, returned to Hastinapura, where their uncle Dhritarashtra welcomed them with mixed feelings. Love for his brother's children, but fear of what their presence might mean for his own son's claim to the throne. Under Bhishma's guidance, the royal household continued to flourish. Bhishma, the guardian of the Kuru line, raised both sets of princes, the 100 Kauravas and the 5 Pandavas, as his own. He believed that if the boys learned together, fought together, and grew together, they might one day rule together. But destiny is rarely so kind. The rivalry that began as childish competition would soon grow into a force far greater than any of them could control. Yudhishthira, the eldest of the Pandavas, was calm, wise, and loved by all. He spoke gently, treated everyone with respect, and seemed born to rule. Bhima, the second brother, was fearless and immensely strong, his appetite matched only by his courage. Arjuna, the third, possessed a focus and discipline that even the gods admired. Nakula and Sahadeva, the youngest twins, were known for their beauty and intellect. Together, they were the pride of Hastinapura, their virtues shining like stars. The Kauravas, led by Duryodhana, were strong and skilled too, but their hearts were clouded by envy. From the moment Duryodhana saw how beloved the Pandavas were, how Bhishma favored them, how the people praised them, and how Arjuna's talent outshone everyone, he felt a deep bitterness take root in his soul. No matter what he did, no matter how hard he tried, he could not bear to see Yudhishthira treated as the rightful heir to the throne that he believed was his by birth. As the princes grew older, Bhishma decided it was time they had a proper teacher, someone who could train them not only in the arts of war, but also in discipline, strategy, and honor. And so, into Hastinapura came a man whose name would echo forever through the corridors of legend. Drona, the great master of weapons. Drona was not a king, nor a warrior in the usual sense. He was a sage of arms, a man born of wisdom and hardship, carrying both knowledge and resentment in his heart. Long ago, he had been close friends with Drupada, a prince of Panchala. The two had promised each other that if one of them ever rose to power, he would share his wealth and friendship with the other. But when Drona later came to Drupada's court, poor and in need, Drupada mocked him, saying that friendship could only exist between equals. Humiliated, Drona left with a silent vow that one day he would repay the insult. That day would come much later, but for now, his focus lay in teaching the young princes of Hastinapura. When Drona demonstrated his skill before Bhishma and Dhritarashtra, his precision and mastery stunned everyone. He could shoot 5 arrows into the eye of a moving bird without looking up, or send a blade spinning through the air to slice a single hair in 2. The court stood in awe. Bhishma, recognizing his genius, appointed him as the royal preceptor. From that day on, the princes rose with the sun and trained under Drona's sharp yet patient gaze. The training ground of Hastinapura became a place of legend. The air was filled with the sound of bows twanging, swords clashing, and the steady beat of discipline. Among all the students, Arjuna shone brightest. His devotion to practice was unmatched. While others rested, Arjuna continued, training in the rain, in the dark, and even by the light of a flickering candle. One night, when a meal was interrupted, and he continued eating instinctively in the dark, he realized that true mastery came when skill became second nature. From that night onward, he practiced tirelessly until his arrows found their mark without fail. Seeing his dedication, Drona secretly favored him and promised to make him the greatest archer in the world. But such favoritism did not go unnoticed. Duryodhana's jealousy deepened, and his resentment toward Arjuna began to twist into hatred. The Kauravas mocked and provoked the Pandavas at every chance they could find, especially Bhima, whose strength was both admired and feared. Duryodhana and his brothers plotted constantly to humiliate him. Once they invited Bhima to a feast and secretly poisoned his food. When Bhima collapsed, they threw his body into the river, hoping he would never rise again. But destiny had other plans. Bhima sank deep into the waters, where he was saved by the Nagas, the serpent beings who lived below. They fed him their celestial nectar, which made him even stronger than before. When he returned to the surface, his strength had become unmatched by any mortal. As time passed, Drona tested his students with greater and greater challenges. One day, he placed a wooden bird high upon a tree and asked each prince to aim for its eye. When he called the Kauravas, they boasted about the tree, the branches, the bird, and the sky. Drona stopped them each time. Then he called Arjuna. "What do you see?" Drona asked. "Only the eye of the bird," Arjuna replied. "Then shoot," said Drona. Arjuna released the arrow, and it struck perfectly through the center of the target. From that moment on, everyone knew Arjuna was Drona's favorite disciple and Destiny's chosen archer. Not long after, Drona revealed his true desire to his students, to capture King Drupada, his old friend turned enemy, and bring him before him in chains. The princes, loyal to their teacher, set out to fulfill his wish. The Kauravas attacked first, but Drupada defeated them easily. Then came the Pandavas, led by Arjuna. With calm precision and unshakable focus, Arjuna fought his way through Drupada's army and captured the king alive, presenting him to Drona. But Drona was no longer filled with hatred. Instead, he divided the kingdom, returning half to Drupada, saying, "Now we are equals once again." Yet in Drupada's heart, another vow was born, to one day have a son who would kill Drona in battle. Thus, another seed of vengeance was sown into the soil of destiny. By now, the entire kingdom whispered of the Pandavas' greatness. The people adored them, and even the elders admired their humility and virtue. This only made Duryodhana's envy burn hotter. He began to see them not as brothers, but as rivals, obstacles standing in his path to the throne. And when jealousy festers in the heart of a man, it rarely stays silent for long. One night, as the moonlight glimmered over the palace, Duryodhana sat with his uncle Shakuni, a man whose cunning was sharper than any blade. Shakuni, with his snake-like calm and cold smile, whispered poison into Duryodhana's ears. "You are the true heir to Hastinapura," he said. "Yet Bhishma and the people favor Yudhishthira. If you allow this to continue, the throne will slip through your hands." From that night onward, Duryodhana's mind was set. If the Pandavas would not step aside, he would find a way to remove them forever. And so, while the princes continued their lessons in archery and dharma, unseen plots began to stir in the shadows of the palace. The first games of deceit were about to begin. But for now, as you rest, imagine the palace of Hastinapura bathed in golden light. A place where young princes train with their bows, laugh together, and share meals, unaware that their destinies have already begun to drift apart. The world still sleeps in peace, but the soft tremors of fate are moving beneath the ground. In this stillness, the story of the Mahabharata takes its next breath. Calm before the storm, peace before the fire. So as you close your eyes, listen to the quiet echoes of their laughter fade into the distance. For soon, that laughter will be replaced by the sound of drums, oaths, and destiny's call, the sound of a world preparing for war. The house of lac and the escape in the heart of Hastinapura. The golden sun fell gently upon the palace roofs, and from the outside everything seemed at peace. The princes were growing into fine young men, their skill and discipline admired by all. The kingdom appeared prosperous, the people content, and the royal halls echoed with laughter and song. But behind those polished walls, envy had begun to whisper in the dark. Duryodhana's hatred for the Pandavas had deepened into something far more dangerous, a quiet obsession that would soon lead to his first great crime. Ever since their training under Drona, the Pandavas had continued to win the hearts of the people. Wherever they went, the citizens cheered their names. Yudhishthira, with his gentle wisdom and sense of justice, was beloved as the true heir to the throne. Bhima's courage, Arjuna's unmatched skill, and the twins' grace made them the pride of Hastinapura. And this, to Duryodhana, was unbearable. Every smile that greeted the Pandavas was a reminder that the people did not see him, the son of the king, as their future. They saw Yudhishthira instead. Each day, Duryodhana's resentment grew sharper, feeding on Shakuni's poisonous counsel. Shakuni, the cunning uncle from Gandhara, was a man who could turn silence into strategy. His words were soft but deadly. "My dear nephew," he said one evening, as the lamps flickered in their chambers, "as long as the Pandavas live, your claim to the throne will never be secure. You are the eldest son of the reigning king, yet the people whisper Yudhishthira's name. If you wish to rule, you must act, and act now." Duryodhana listened, torn between fear and desire. "But how, uncle?" he asked. "They are loved by Bhishma and Drona. Even the gods seem to favor them." Shakuni smiled thinly. "Then you must strike not with a sword, but with a plan. Let your attack come in the form of friendship, and let your weapon be fire." Soon after, Shakuni and Duryodhana began to weave their first plot, a trap built not of steel, but of deception. They went to King Dhritarashtra, whose blind eyes could not see the world, but whose heart could be easily swayed by his sons. Duryodhana spoke with carefully measured innocence. "Father," he began, "the Pandavas have become strong and skilled. The people love them dearly, and that is good for the kingdom. But they need independence, their own land to rule, so they may learn the duties of kingship. If they remain here, jealousy may grow between brothers. Why not send them away to a nearby city, where they can rule in peace?" The king, always anxious to keep harmony between his sons, agreed. "Perhaps you are right, my child," he said softly. "Let them live in Varnavada. It is a beautiful place, filled with gardens and open fields. It will do them good." Duryodhana bowed respectfully, concealing his triumph. A trap had been set. In secret, Shakuni arranged for a magnificent palace to be built in Varnavada, a palace made entirely of lac, or laksha, a substance as beautiful as it was deadly. Black was smooth and shiny like polished marble, but beneath its beauty lay danger. It was as flammable as dry oil. One spark could turn the entire structure into an inferno. To the outside world, it would appear a gift of honor. To the Pandavas, it would become their tomb. Soon, a messenger arrived at Hastinapura, inviting the Pandavas to reside in the new palace. Bhishma, ever trusting, believed it was a kind gesture from the king. Vidura, however, was not so easily deceived. Wise and perceptive, he sensed danger in the sudden generosity. As Yudhishthira prepared to leave, Vidura took him aside and whispered a warning in a riddle only the eldest Pandava could understand. He who knows the difference between a house built of wood and a house built of wax, Vidura said quietly, should carry his fire within and his escape beneath the ground. Yudhishthira nodded. The meaning was clear. The house was a trap, and if they were to survive, they would need to be clever, not brave. The Pandavas, along with their mother Kunti, traveled to Varnavata. The palace that awaited them was dazzling beyond imagination. Walls gleaming like gold, floors so smooth they reflected the lamps like mirrors. To anyone else, it was a paradise. But Yudhishthira and Bhima exchanged knowing looks. They could smell the faint, oily scent of lac hidden beneath the perfumes. They understood then that this was no gift. It was death disguised as luxury. To avoid suspicion, they pretended to be delighted by the palace. But every night, while others slept, Bhima and a loyal miner sent secretly by Vidura dug a hidden tunnel beneath the ground. It would stretch far beyond the city, opening into the thick forest miles away, their only chance of escape. Days turned into weeks, and the tunnel grew longer, inch by inch, built in silence while the scent of danger thickened in the air. One night, as the moon rose red and low over Varnavata, Yudhishthira sensed that their enemy's patience was running out. He whispered to his brothers, "The time has come. The fire they have prepared for us must consume itself instead." A festival was soon announced, a night of celebration in honor of the Pandavas' new home. Duryodhana's men arrived, pretending friendship, and joined the feast. That night, as wine flowed and laughter filled the hall, Bhima quietly lit a small flame in the corner of the palace. Within moments, the lacquered walls caught fire, glowing red and gold before bursting into wild flames. The air filled with the roar of the blaze as smoke curled toward the sky. The palace that had been built as their grave became a pyre for the deceivers who guarded it. Through the chaos, the Pandavas and Kunti escaped into the secret tunnel, crawling through darkness, guided only by the faint light of hope. Behind them, the palace collapsed into fire. The people of Varnavata awoke to horror. The grand house had burned through the night, and everyone believed the Pandavas had perished within it. News reached Hastinapura at dawn. The city mourned. Duryodhana pretended sorrow, but inside he rejoiced, believing his rivals were finally gone. Meanwhile, far from the city, the Pandavas emerged from the tunnel into the cool night air of the forest. Exhausted and covered in ash, they looked back toward the direction of the flames. Kunti's heart ached for the people who had died unknowingly in their place. But Yudhishthira reminded her that Dharma sometimes demands survival, for the sake of truth and justice yet to come. From that night onward, the Pandavas became wanderers. They could not return to Hastinapura, for their enemies believed them dead. They moved quietly through forests and villages, disguised as Brahmins, blending into the life of simple travelers. Their days of royal comfort were over. Ahead lay the path of hardship, trials, and destiny. For Bhima, the forest became both refuge and stage. It was here he encountered the fierce and beautiful Hidimbi, a forest-dwelling woman cursed by her brother, the demon Hidimba. Drawn to Bhima's strength and courage, she helped him defeat her monstrous brother and became his wife. From their union was born Gatotkacha, a son of immense power and magical strength, whose role in the war to come would one day prove vital. But for now, the Pandavas wandered on, living in the shadows of their own death, moving from one village to another, guided by fate and by the quiet faith that truth would someday prevail. They were alive, but the world believed otherwise. And in that false death lay their first victory. As you rest tonight, imagine the flicker of that ancient fire glowing softly against the dark sky. The palace burns its flames, rising like a warning to the heavens, while far away 5 brothers walk through the forest, their mother by their side, carrying with them not riches or titles, but the strength of unity, love, and destiny. Their enemies believe them gone, but destiny has only just begun to test them. The night grows deeper, and the story sleeps for now, its heroes safe in the shadows, its villains celebrating an illusion. But soon, the path will lead the Pandavas to the kingdom of Panchala, where a woman's destiny and a divine plan will change everything. The tale continues, quiet now, but burning just beneath the surface, waiting for dawn. The Swayamvara of Draupadi. The morning sun rose softly through the trees, casting gold over the quiet forest where the Pandavas rested. Weeks had passed since they had escaped the burning house of Lac, and though they had found temporary safety, their journey was far from over. Disguised as humble Brahmins, they wandered from village to village, seeking no recognition, drawing little attention. The once proud princes of Hastinapura now lived on alms, sleeping beneath the stars, learning the simplicity of life stripped of power and luxury. In these days of wandering, their mother, Kunti, found her sons growing not just in strength, but in wisdom. Hardship had burned away their arrogance. Exile had taught them patience. Each brother had discovered something within himself. Yudhishthira's calm deepened into true serenity. Bhima's strength found a purpose in protection rather than pride, and Arjuna's devotion to skill became a kind of meditation. The twins, Nakula and Sahadeva, learned silence and observation, reading the world like the open forest paths they walked upon. But the world had not forgotten them entirely. Far away, in the kingdom of Panchala, destiny was stirring. King Drupada, once humiliated by Drona, the teacher of the Pandavas and Kauravas, had performed a great sacrifice. His heart had burned with the desire for vengeance against Drona, and from the sacred fire of that Yajna were born 2 extraordinary children. Drishtadyumna, a warrior destined to kill Drona, and Draupadi, a woman of unparalleled beauty and grace, destined to change the fate of kingdoms. Draupadi was unlike anyone the world had ever seen. Her beauty was luminous, yes, but it was her spirit that drew the attention of gods and men alike. Her eyes carried both gentleness and fire, her words were measured with intelligence, and her presence held the strength of divinity itself. She was said to be born not of a mother's womb, but of sacred flame, the daughter of destiny. As she grew, so did the stories about her, that her laughter could calm storms and her anger could ignite them. When Draupadi reached the age of marriage, her father Drupada decided that only the worthiest man in the world should win her hand. And so he announced a Swayamvara, a great gathering where princes and warriors from across the land would come to compete for Draupadi's hand in marriage. The challenge was designed to test not strength, but mastery and focus, qualities of a true archer. A massive bow, so heavy that few could even lift it, was placed before the gathered kings. Above it hung a revolving metal disc with a tiny hole in its center. Through that hole, reflected in a pool of water below, was a golden fish turning slowly on a wheel above. The challenge was this: the man who could string the bow and shoot an arrow through the hole of the disc, striking the eye of the fish, while, looking only at its reflection in the water, he would win Draupadi's hand. As word of the Swayamvara spread across kingdoms, the news reached the Pandavas, who were still living in disguise in the city of Ekakokra. Yudhishthira listened quietly to the travelers, describing the great contest, and then looked at his brothers with a faint smile. "Perhaps," he said, This is not just a contest. Perhaps destiny calls us once again. And so, with their mother's blessing, the 5 brothers set out for Panchula, dressed as simple Brahmins, carrying only their bows and a few possessions. When they reached the city, they saw that it had transformed into a sea of people. Princes, kings, and warriors had arrived from all corners of Bharat. Banners fluttered in the wind, drums thundered, and the air hummed with excitement. The Pandavas found a place among the spectators, blending into the crowd. None knew who they were, for their clothes were plain and their demeanor humble. Yet, as they looked upon the grand arena, something stirred in Arjuna's heart. He felt a quiet pull, as if fate itself had brought him there. A whisper in his spirit that told him his life was about to change forever. In the royal stands, King Drupada sat beside his radiant daughter Draupadi, who looked down upon the gathered heroes. Around her, the mightiest of kings had assembled: Duryodhana, Karna, Shalya, Jarzanda, and many others, each confident of his skill. As the contest began, one by one, the princes stepped forward to try their luck. Some could not even lift the bow. Others strained to string it, their muscles trembling, faces red with effort, only to fail. The crowd murmured with disappointment, but Draupadi remained calm, her eyes observing quietly. Then the great warrior Karna stepped forward. His presence silenced the arena. He was the king of Anga, known across the land as an unmatched archer, rivaled only by Arjuna himself. He lifted the bow effortlessly and strung it in one smooth motion. The crowd gasped. The air seemed to still as Karna aimed at the revolving fish. For a moment, even Draupadi's eyes lingered on him. But as he prepared to shoot, she rose to her feet and spoke clearly, her voice calm yet firm. "I do not accept the hand of one who is not of royal birth." The words hung heavy in the air. The crowd erupted into whispers. Karna froze. Though he was the son of the sun god Surya, the world knew him only as the son of a charioteer. His face hardened, pride burning beneath the insult, but he said nothing. He simply placed the bow down and stepped away, his silence filled with pain and dignity. Among the crowd, Arjuna watched quietly. He had long admired Karna's skill, yet he understood that destiny was speaking in Draupadi's words. He turned to Yudhishthira. "Brother," he said softly, "it is time." Dressed as a Brahmin, Arjuna stepped forward. Laughter rippled through the assembly. "A Brahmin?" someone whispered. "This is not a contest for beggars." But Drupada, intrigued by the young man's calm confidence, allowed him to try. Arjuna bowed respectfully and approached the bow. As his fingers touched it, it was as though the weapon recognized him. The weight felt natural, familiar, like an old friend. With effortless grace, he lifted it and strung it in one motion. The murmurs in the crowd turned to silence. Draupadi's eyes widened slightly, her heart sensing something beyond what she saw. Arjuna looked into the reflection of the pool, studying the spinning fish above. His focus sharpened, his mind emptying of sound and thought. In that moment, there was only stillness. And then, with the swiftness of lightning, he released the arrow. The sound of the strings snapped like thunder. The arrow flew straight and true, piercing the revolving target's eye in a perfect strike. The arena exploded in applause and disbelief. "Who is he?" Voices cried out. What Brahmin could shoot like that? But Draupadi's gaze was steady. She rose, her eyes shining with quiet joy, and stepped forward with the garland of victory in her hands. Arjuna stood humbly before her, his head bowed. Draupadi placed the garland around his neck, and for a moment, time seemed to hold its breath. Two souls, bound by destiny long before birth, had finally met. But the triumph was short-lived. From the royal stands, many kings rose in outrage. "This cannot be," they shouted. "How can a mere Brahmin win the daughter of Drupada?" Tension surged through the crowd. Weapons gleaming as hands reached for swords. Before chaos could erupt, Bhima stepped forward, standing like a mountain between his brother and the angry princess. "He who wishes to fight," Bhima roared, "come forward and taste my strength." For a moment, the threat silenced all. But before battle could break out, Krishna, yes, Lord Krishna, appearing here for the first time, rose from among the Yadava princes. Smiling gently, he raised his hand and spoke in a calm musical voice that seemed to settle the air itself. "Peace, my friends," he said. "Greatness is not bound by birth, nor does destiny bow to titles. What was meant to be has been." His words carried such weight that no one dared to argue further. The tension eased, and the Pandavas, still disguised, quietly left with Draupadi, making their way back to the humble hut where Kunti waited. When they arrived, they called out playfully from the doorway, "Mother, see what we have brought today." Kunti, thinking they spoke of alms, replied without turning, "Whatever it is, my sons, share it equally among yourselves." The moment the words left her lips, silence fell. Kunti turned, her eyes widening as she saw Draupadi standing beside them. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Yudhishthira, ever wise, said gently, "Mother, your words are sacred. They cannot be undone. Perhaps this is the will of destiny itself." And so it was decided. Draupadi would become the wife of all 5 Pandavas, each brother united to her in spirit and duty, bound by dharma and destiny. The decision shocked the world, but even sages and gods agreed, for Draupadi had been born for this purpose, to unite the 5 great souls in one path toward the fulfillment of divine fate. That night, as the fires burned softly in Panchala and the stars shimmered above, Krishna smiled to himself. The wheel of destiny had begun to turn once more. The Pandavas had found both love and purpose, and soon the path would lead them back to Hastinapura, back to the kingdom, the throne, and the beginnings of a story that would shape the very soul of humanity. So as you close your eyes tonight, imagine the soft music of the Swayamvara fading into silence, the garland around Arjuna's neck, the faint smile on Draupadi's lips, and Krishna watching from afar, knowing that what has begun tonight will echo through eternity. The story of love, destiny, and war has only just begun. Return to Hastinapura and the birth of Indraprastha. The sound of drums echoed faintly in the distance as the sun rose over the plains of Panchala, painting the sky with gold and crimson. The Swayamvara had ended, and with it, the destiny of kingdoms had quietly shifted. The 5 brothers, once wanderers, believed dead, living in the shadows, had now re-emerged into the light. Their union with Draupadi was not merely a marriage. It was the rekindling of fate itself. The news of Draupadi's Swayamvara spread like wildfire across the land. Whispers turned into waves of astonishment when people learned that the unknown Brahmin, who had strung the mighty bow, was none other than Arjuna, the son of Pandu. The Pandavas were alive. The revelation shook Hastinapura to its core. In the royal court, Dhritarashtra sat frozen when the messengers brought him the news. "The sons of Pandu live?" He repeated in disbelief. A strange mix of relief and unease passed over his face. Beside him, Duryodhana's expression darkened. For months he had believed his enemies reduced to ashes. Now they had returned not as exiles or beggars, but as heroes, celebrated across kingdoms. And worse, they were now allied with King Drupada of Panchala, a powerful ruler whose armies could rival Hastinapura itself. Bhishma, on the other hand, smiled when he heard the news. "The gods are just," he said softly. "No fire can destroy those whom destiny protects." Vidura, too, rejoiced quietly. He had never doubted that the Pandavas would survive. But he also knew what their return meant. A storm was brewing, one that would test every bond in the royal family. Duryodhana, consumed by jealousy, turned once again to his father. "Father," he said bitterly, "the sons of Pandu are alive, and now they have allied with our enemies. If they return to Hastinapura, they will claim the throne that is rightfully mine. Must we again live under their shadow? Dhritarashtra, torn between love for his sons and his duty as king, hesitated. He looked toward Bhishma and Vidura for counsel. What should we do? He asked. Bhishma, whose wisdom had long guided the throne, spoke firmly. They are your brother's sons, O king. They have suffered enough. If you wish to bring peace to this kingdom, call them home. Reconciliation is the path of Dharma. Vidura added softly, let not jealousy guide your decision. They are your blood, and the people love them. If you bring them back, the kingdom will be whole again. After long silence, Dhritarashtra nodded. So be it, he said. Let the sons of Pandu return home. Messengers were sent to Panchala with the royal invitation. When the news reached the Pandavas, Yudhishthira listened quietly. His heart was calm, but his mind remained cautious. If they welcome us with truth in their hearts, peace will return, he said. But if deceit still lingers, we must walk carefully. And so, the Pandavas, along with their mother Kunti and their new bride Draupadi, began their journey back to Hastinapura. As they entered the city gates, the streets filled with people. Men, women, and children crowded the roads, their voices echoing with joy. The sons of Pandu have returned. They cried. Flowers rained from balconies, and the air shimmered with the music of flutes and drums. For the people, it was not just a homecoming. It was the return of hope. Bhishma and Vidura welcomed them with tears in their eyes. Even Dhritarashtra, though blind, embraced Yudhishthira warmly. You are as dear to me as my own sons, he said, his voice trembling. The past is behind us. Let peace reign again. But behind him, Duryodhana stood silent, his jaw clenched. His mind burned with envy as he watched the crowds cheering for his cousins. To him, every smile for the Pandavas was a wound upon his pride. Yet, bound by politics and his father's word, he said nothing. That evening, in the great royal hall, a grand assembly was held. The Pandavas, seated with honor, listened as Dhritarashtra addressed them. My children, he said, you have suffered much, and I am proud of your courage. But it would not be wise for all of us to rule the same land. To maintain peace and brotherhood, I divide the kingdom. Half shall remain with Duryodhana here in Hastinapura. The other half shall be yours. You may rule from Pandava-prasha, a land on the western plains. At first, Yudhishthira bowed in gratitude. Whatever you grant us, O king, we shall accept with joy. But when the Pandavas traveled to see their new territory, they found it barren and desolate, a wasteland covered with thorny forests, cracked earth, and wild beasts. The ruins of old cities lay half buried in the dust. Duryodhana's smirk at the time of the division now made sense. He had given them not a kingdom, but a curse of land forgotten by time. Bhima's anger flared. They insult us again, he thundered. They call this ashes and dirt a kingdom? But Yudhishthira raised his hand calmly. No land is cursed, my brother, if we approach it with faith and effort. Let us build our destiny here. And so began the transformation of Pandava-prasha into something the world had never seen. Under the Pandavas' leadership, and with the divine guidance of Krishna, who had by now become their friend, ally, and spiritual guide, the barren land began to bloom. The forests were cleared, rivers redirected, roads laid out in graceful patterns. From the dust rose temples, gardens, and palaces of dazzling beauty. To aid in their work, Krishna summoned the divine architect Vishwakarma, who crafted for them a city that seemed touched by heaven itself. Its streets glowed like silver threads, and its towers reached the clouds. The air shimmered with fragrance, and the sound of music drifted from every corner. When it was finished, even the gods looked upon it with wonder. They named it Indraprastha, the city of Indra, radiant, prosperous, and alive. It became a symbol of the Pandavas' rise, a testament to their unity and perseverance. The people rejoiced under Yudhishthira's rule, for his governance was marked by fairness, compassion, and peace. As the years passed, Indraprastha flourished. The Pandavas lived in harmony, each fulfilling his role. Yudhishthira as the wise king, Bhima as protector, Arjuna as the unrivaled warrior, Nakula and Sahadeva as keepers of prosperity and order. Draupadi ruled beside them with grace and strength, beloved by all for her wisdom and courage. But beyond the joy and prosperity, a quiet shadow lingered. In Hastinapura, Duryodhana's envy festered once more. Each story of Indraprastha's beauty felt to him like a fresh humiliation. They were given a desert, he said bitterly to Shakuni, and they turned it into paradise. Must they always rise above us? Shakuni, with his serpent smile, replied, "Patience, my nephew. Let them climb higher, for the higher they rise, the greater their fall will be." The dice of destiny had been placed upon the board once again, unseen, untouched, but ready to be thrown. For now, peace reigned between the two kingdoms, but beneath the calm surface, jealousy and fate were slowly stirring. And as the night deepens in our tale, imagine the golden city of Indraprastha glowing under the moon, its towers shining like stars, its streets alive with laughter. The Pandavas sleep peacefully in their palace, unaware that far away, in the shadows of Hastinapura, a dark plan is already being born, one that will soon test everything they have built. The years that followed were among the most radiant in the lives of the Pandavas. Under Yudhishthira's rule, Indraprastha flourished like a dream made real, a kingdom of fairness, wisdom, and light. Its streets glimmered with prosperity, and its people lived in peace. From the great halls of the palace to the humble cottages by the riverbanks, there was laughter, music, and a hum of contentment. Yudhishthira ruled not as a conqueror, but as a guardian. He treated every man, woman, and child as his own. He spoke gently, punished rarely, and gave generously. His love for truth and justice earned him the name Dharmaraja, the king of righteousness. Yet even in his serenity, Yudhishthira felt the subtle pull of destiny. He knew that peace, while beautiful, was never eternal. One evening, as the sun melted into gold over the city walls, Krishna visited Indraprastha. The air shimmered with excitement, for wherever Krishna went, the world seemed to glow a little brighter. He was welcomed like a brother, and after the day's festivities, he and Yudhishthira sat alone in the quiet of the royal garden. The breeze carried the scent of sandalwood and jasmine, and the soft murmur of fountains filled the silence. "Krishna," Yudhishthira said thoughtfully, "our kingdom is at peace. Our people are happy. Yet I cannot shake the feeling that my duty is not yet complete. I am told that only by performing the Rajasuya, the imperial sacrifice, can a king fulfill his dharma to its fullest. But such a ritual would mean asking all other rulers to recognize my sovereignty. I fear it may bring conflict." Krishna smiled gently. "Dharma and destiny often walk the same path, my friend. The Rajasuya Yagna is not for pride, but for purpose. The world is fragmented. Kings fight without cause, and righteousness fades. You have the strength and virtue to unite them. Perform the yagna, not for glory, but to restore harmony. And if obstacles come, face them with courage." With Krishna's blessing, Yudhishthira resolved to perform the great Rajasuya Yagna, a ceremony that would declare him emperor of Bharatvarsha, the ruler to whom all kings would offer allegiance. But to earn that title, the Pandavas first had to subdue or win the loyalty of every neighboring ruler. The task was divided among the brothers. Arjuna set forth to the north, Bhima to the east, Nakula to the west, and Sahadeva to the south. Wherever they went, the Pandavas were met with admiration, for they did not conquer with cruelty, but with honor. Many kings willingly accepted Yudhishthira's supremacy, for they knew his rule was one of justice. Some resisted, but none could stand against the might and righteousness of the Pandava brothers. In time, all directions bowed in respect, and the wealth of nations flowed into Indraprastha. When the brothers returned, the city prepared for the grandest ritual the world had ever seen. Invitations were sent to kings and sages from every corner of Bharat. The sages arrived in white robes, the kings in gold armor, and the air itself seemed to tremble with the hum of divine anticipation. On the appointed day, the great Rajasuya Yagna began. Fires blazed in the sacred square, offerings were poured, mantras filled the air, and the fragrance of ghee and flowers carried upward like prayers. The gods were invoked, the ancestors honored, and the kings seated in splendor. At the heart of the ceremony sat Yudhishthira, radiant in white silk, his crown gleaming faintly beneath the sun. Beside him stood Draupadi, resplendent, her calm dignity reflecting the glory of her husband's reign. When the final rites were completed, Yudhishthira was declared Chakravarti Raja, the universal monarch. The crowd erupted in joy, and the heavens themselves seemed to smile upon Indraprastha. But tradition demanded one final act, the honoring of the Agriya Puja, the first worship offered to the greatest among those assembled. A murmur spread through the hall as Yudhishthira turned to his brothers. "Tell me," he asked, "who among these kings and sages deserves the first honor?" Without hesitation, Bhishma rose and said, "There is none greater than Krishna. He is the eternal soul that guides us all. Worship him first." The hall fell silent for a moment, then erupted in agreement. Yudhishthira bowed before Krishna and placed a garland of flowers around his neck. The music of conchs and drums filled the air, but not all hearts rejoiced. In one corner of the assembly, Shishupala, the king of Shedi, seethed with fury. He had long hated Krishna, his cousin, and now the sight of him being worshipped above all others drove him into a rage. He leapt to his feet and shouted, "How dare you honor a cowherd over kings and warriors? What greatness lies in Krishna that he should receive the first worship?" The hall froze. Every eye turned toward Krishna, who stood calm, his smile unshaken. "O Shishupala," he said softly, "your anger blinds you as always. But you have already been forgiven more times than you deserve. Your time has come." Before anyone could move, a flash of light erupted from Krishna's hand. His Sudarshana chakra, the divine discus, spun through the air, and in a heartbeat, Shishupala's rage ended in silence. The crowd gasped, but then understanding dawned. They bowed to Krishna, realizing that even in punishment, he upheld cosmic order. The ceremony ended in glory. Yudhishthira's name spread through all lands as the righteous emperor, and Indraprastha became the heart of the world's prosperity. Yet far away, in Hastinapura, another story was unfolding. Duryodhana, who had reluctantly attended the yagna, returned home with a heart full of poison. During his stay in Indraprastha, he had been given the freedom to explore the Palace of Illusions, a marvel crafted by the divine architect Maya. It was a place where walls looked like open spaces, where floors shimmered like water, and where pools of water looked like glass. As Duryodhana walked through this palace, he was mocked gently by fate itself. Mistaking glass for water, he lifted his robes to cross, only to find the floor solid beneath his feet. Then, mistaking a pool of water for marble, he stepped forward and fell in with a splash. Hidden attendants laughed softly, and Draupadi, from a balcony above, smiled at the sight. It was a small, innocent moment, yet to Duryodhana it was the spark that ignited his deepest hatred. Humiliation burned in his chest, twisting into rage. As he rose, dripping with water and fury, he heard Draupadi's laughter echoing like a curse in his mind. "The son of a blind man," she said lightly, "must learn to see where he walks." Those words, spoken in jest, not cruelty, became the wound he would never heal. That night, as Duryodhana left Indraprastha, his heart was black with envy. Every jewel, every tower, Every smile he had seen there became fuel for his anger. When he reached Hastinapura, he went straight to his father. "Father," he said, his voice trembling with suppressed rage, "you have made a grave mistake. You divided the kingdom to keep peace, but you have only created rivals stronger than us. While we live modestly, they live like gods. While we struggle for power, they are worshipped as emperors. Shall we continue to bow to them forever?" Dhritarashtra sighed. "What would you have me do, my son?" And Duryodhana's eyes gleamed like those of his uncle Shakuni, who stood silently beside him. "Invite them," he said. "Invite my dear cousins to Hastinapura for a friendly game of dice. Let us test fortune, for what power is greater than luck?" Shakuni smiled, the kind of smile that carried centuries of cunning and deceit. "Yes," he said softly, "the dice will decide what swords cannot." And thus, in the golden halls of Indraprastha, the seeds of jealousy were sown. What began as laughter would soon become lamentation. What began as a game would lead to ruin. But for now, as the night drapes over our story, imagine Indraprastha glowing like a jewel under the moonlight, beautiful, silent, and unaware that its brilliance has already stirred the shadows. The Pandavas sleep in peace, unaware that destiny is already shuffling the dice that will change everything. The game of dice. The fall of Indraprastha. After the grand Rajasuya Yagna, the kingdom of Indraprastha stood as the crown of Bharat, gleaming with prosperity, justice, and peace. The Pandavas had earned the love of their people, the respect of kings, and the blessing of the gods. Yet in the shadows of this triumph, jealousy began to take root. Duryodhana could not forget the dazzling halls of the Mayasabha, the laughter of Draupadi, and the painful sting of humiliation he had suffered before the assembled kings. His heart, once merely envious, now burned with a consuming desire for revenge. Unable to find peace, Duryodhana spent sleepless nights, haunted by the sight of Yudhishthira as wealth and Draupadi his radiant confidence. His pride wounded beyond measure, he confided in his uncle Shakuni, the cunning prince of Gandhara, whose mind was sharper than any blade. Shakuni listened patiently to Duryodhana's tale of humiliation, then spoke in a voice soft and dangerous. "My dear nephew, envy is a fire that consumes only the weak. Use it instead to destroy those who mock you. The Pandavas may be strong in battle, but even the mightiest warriors can fall to strategy. Yudhishthira has one weakness, his love for the game of dice. Let us challenge him, and I will ensure the dice fall exactly as I wish." A cruel light flickered in Duryodhana's eyes as Shakuni's plan unfolded in his mind. The next day he approached his father, the blind King Dhritarashtra, pretending concern for family unity. "Father," he said with deceptive sweetness, "our cousins have grown powerful beyond all measure. Their Rajasuya Yagna has made them emperors. It would honor our family to invite them to Hastinapura for a friendly game of dice. After all, such games are a royal tradition." Dhritarashtra hesitated, aware of his son's jealousy and the dangers of gambling, but blinded by paternal affection and the illusion of peace, he agreed. Messengers were sent to Indraprastha, carrying the invitation that would soon unravel the fabric of destiny. When Yudhishthira received the message, his heart grew uneasy. He knew Duryodhana's nature and sensed the trap behind the courteous words. Yet his adherence to Dharma and royal etiquette bound him. To refuse a king's invitation would be considered arrogance and insult, especially when it came from his elder cousin. Bound by duty, he agreed to attend, even as his instincts warned him that this journey would not end well. Upon their arrival in Hastinapura, the Pandavas were greeted with false smiles and courteous words. The great hall of the Kauravas had been prepared for the game, adorned with gold lamps and fine carpets. In the center sat Shakuni, his eyes gleaming with quiet confidence, the dice carved from the bones of his ancestors resting in his hands. Yudhishthira greeted his elders, Bhishma, Drona, Vidura, and Dhritarashtra with deep respect before taking his seat opposite Shakuni. The game began simply. "What shall we wager, O king?" Shakuni asked smoothly. Yudhishthira, trying to keep the game innocent, began with gold and jewels. But fate had already turned against him. Each time Shakuni cast the dice, they fell exactly as he desired. Every throw was a loss for Yudhishthira. The murmur of the crowd grew uneasy as Yudhishthira's fortune slipped away, yet his pride and sense of honor would not allow him to stop. Shakuni's voice was honeyed with temptation. "Why stop now, O king? Surely the emperor of Bharat does not retreat from chance so easily. Wager something greater. Perhaps your chariot, your palaces, your lands." One by one, Yudhishthira lost everything. His treasures, his horses, his armies, his kingdom all vanished into the hands of Shakuni and Duryodhana. Bhima clenched his fists in fury, whispering that they should walk away, but Yudhishthira, bound by his oath to continue, refused to yield. "A Kshatriya never breaks his word," he said solemnly, even as despair began to weigh on his heart. When all else was lost, Shakuni's tone grew darker, his words like venom. "A king's glory lies not in gold or land, but in those who stand beside him. You have brothers noble, valiant men. Will you stake them next?" The court fell silent in horror. Yudhishthira hesitated, torn between duty and madness. His reason clouded by humiliation, he agreed. The dice rolled again, and as always, Shakuni won. Shakuni's voice now dripped with false pity. "You have lost your brothers, O king. What remains to wager?" "Ah, but there is one treasure left, the jewel of your house, your wife, Draupadi." A gasp swept through the court. Even Dhritarashtra shifted uneasily, while Bhishma and Vidura protested in outrage. "This is not Dharma," Bhishma thundered. "A man who has lost himself cannot stake another's freedom." But Duryodhana, intoxicated by vengeance, ignored the elders. "If Yudhishthira calls himself a true Kshatriya," he sneered, "let him stand by his word." Yudhishthira's face was pale, his spirit broken. In that moment of despair, he agreed to the final, fatal wager. The dice clattered once more, sealing the fate of the Pandavas. Shakuni's smile widened. "You have lost again," he said quietly. "Draupadi now belongs to us." Duryodhana rose to his feet, his voice echoing through the hall. "Dushasana, go, fetch Draupadi from her chambers. Bring her to the court, for she is now our servant." The words hung in the air like poison. In that moment, every noble man in the court knew that something sacred had been shattered. Soon, the doors of the royal hall opened, and Draupadi was dragged in by her long hair, her eyes blazing with fury and disbelief. Her voice rang out, sharp and clear, cutting through the silence. "How dare you summon me here in such a manner? Tell me, O wise men of this court, did my husband lose himself first, or me? If he lost himself first, he had no right to stake me at all." Her question struck like thunder. No one could answer. Bhishma, torn between law and conscience, whispered that Dharma itself had become clouded. Vidura cried out in anger, calling the act a sin against all righteousness. Yet Duryodhana only laughed, slapping his thigh in arrogance. "You are now our slave, Draupadi. Come and sit upon my lap." A wave of horror swept through the hall. Bhima roared with fury, vowing to one day break Duryodhana's thigh for that insult. Arjuna restrained him, reminding him that their hands were tied by Yudhishthira's vow. Dushasana, in a frenzy, reached for Draupadi's sari, attempting to strip her in front of the court. But Draupadi, trembling yet resolute, closed her eyes and called upon Krishna. In that moment of deepest humiliation, the divine answered. As Dushasana pulled and pulled, the sari never ended. It grew longer and longer, an endless river of fabric that covered her endlessly. Exhausted, Dushasana collapsed, his strength spent, his arrogance crushed. Draupadi stood unbroken, her faith radiant, her dignity untouchable. The court fell silent, awed by the miracle. Shame washed over Dhritarashtra as he realized the sin that had been committed in his name. Fearful of divine retribution, he begged Draupadi's forgiveness. "O daughter of Drupada," he said, "I have wronged you. Ask of me any boon, and it shall be granted." With calm dignity, Draupadi asked only for the freedom of her husbands. Dhritarashtra granted it, hoping to restore peace. But even as the Pandavas left the hall, their hearts heavy and their honor wounded, Shakuni's whispers were already working upon Duryodhana's pride once more. The cycle of deceit was not yet done. Yudhishthira was soon called back for another game, a second crueler gamble that would lead to their exile in the wilderness for 13 years. That night, as the Pandavas departed from Hastinapura, the streets were silent, and even the wind seemed to mourn. Draupadi walked beside her husbands, her feet bare, her head held high, a fire of vengeance burning in her eyes. The dice had been cast, and destiny had chosen its path. What had once been a tale of glory had now become a story of exile, betrayal, and divine justice waiting to be fulfilled. The exile, years in the forest and the path of endurance. The day the Pandavas left Hastinapura was one of deep silence and sorrow. Once they had walked those same streets as princes, proud, adorned, and beloved. But now they walked barefoot, their heads bowed, stripped of all wealth and honor. The people of Hastinapura stood in stunned grief as their noble kings passed by, accompanied by Draupadi, whose face carried neither tears nor defeat, but the fierce dignity of a woman wronged. Even the wind seemed heavy that day, carrying the echoes of injustice through the land. In that moment, a kingdom that had once been united by family was torn apart by envy, deceit, and the betrayal of Dharma. The Pandavas, bound by their vow, entered the forest to live in exile for 13 years, 12 in the wilderness and 1 in disguise. Though fate had robbed them of everything, it could not break their spirit. Yudhishthira, the eldest, bore his pain with calm acceptance, believing that suffering, too, was part of divine justice. Bhima, his heart blazing with fury, swore vengeance upon Duryodhana and Shakuni. Arjuna remained silent, his focus inward, his heart torn between anger and duty. Nakula and Sahadeva, loyal and disciplined, followed their brothers without question. And Draupadi, the fire-born queen, whose honor had been desecrated in front of the world, walked beside them with unwavering resolve, her every step a promise of justice yet to come. The first days in the forest were harsh. The luxury of royal life gave way to hunger, heat, and the vast, indifferent silence of the wilderness. The forest was alive with sounds, the rustle of unseen animals, the cry of birds, the whisper of wind through towering trees, but beneath it all lay a strange peace, a peace that the city had long forgotten. Slowly they built a life from nothing. The sages of the forest welcomed them, sharing food and wisdom. They taught the Pandavas how to live close to nature, to find strength in simplicity and contentment in faith. Yudhishthira spent his days in prayer and reflection, seeking to understand why fate had turned against them. He often sat beneath a great banyan tree, meditating upon the meaning of Dharma, asking himself whether he had failed as a king or as a man. His calm presence steadied his brothers, who found solace in his composure. Bhima, restless and powerful, hunted for food and protected their camp from wild beasts. His mighty roar was enough to silence the fiercest lions, and yet his heart ached to avenge the humiliation of Draupadi. Arjuna devoted himself to the mastery of weapons, training each day with his Gandiva bow, preparing for the inevitable reckoning that awaited them. In those years of exile, the Pandavas encountered many sages, divine beings, and challenges that shaped their destiny. One such encounter was with sage Markandeya, who visited them and spoke of endurance, reminding them that even the gods test those they love most. He told Draupadi the story of great women who had faced suffering, yet never surrendered their virtue or faith. His words gave her strength, though her anger against Duryodhana never cooled. She often questioned Yudhishthira's calm acceptance, unable to understand how he could forgive the unforgivable. A wife was dragged into the court, and Dharma stood silent. She said bitterly, "How can peace exist when justice sleeps?" Yudhishthira would only reply gently, "Draupadi, time is a river that never forgets. One day its current will return all things to balance." As months passed, Arjuna felt an inner calling to seek greater strength. With Yudhishthira's blessing, he journeyed alone to the Himalayas to perform penance and obtain divine weapons that would one day decide the fate of the war that loomed in destiny. In the icy silence of the mountains, he meditated for months until the god Shiva himself appeared, disguised as a hunter. When Arjuna unknowingly challenged him, their battle shook the heavens. But when Arjuna realized who his opponent was, he fell to his knees in reverence. Impressed by his courage and humility, Shiva granted him the Pasupatastra, one of the most powerful celestial weapons ever known. Later, other gods, Indra, Varuna, Yama, and Kubera, also blessed Arjuna with divine astras, preparing him for the great war yet to come. Meanwhile, back in the forest, the Pandavas faced trials of another kind. One day, while searching for water, the brothers came upon a serene lake shimmering under the sun. Bhima, thirsty and impatient, ignored a mysterious voice that warned, "Answer my questions before drinking, or you will die." One by one, the brothers defied the voice and fell lifeless to the ground. Finally, Yudhishthira arrived, and unlike his brothers, stopped to listen. The voice belonged to a yaksha, a divine being who tested his wisdom through riddles about life, truth, and virtue. Yudhishthira answered each question with calm intelligence and humility. Satisfied, the yaksha revealed himself to be Yama, the god of death and Yudhishthira's divine father, and restored the brothers to life. It was a reminder that wisdom, not power, is what sustains the righteous through darkness. The years rolled by, filled with moments of sorrow, reflection, and quiet revelations. Draupadi's spirit, though weary, remained fierce. She never forgot her vow that Duryodhana and his brothers would pay for their cruelty. Bhima swore upon her vow that he would one day drink Dushasana's blood and break Duryodhana's thigh, the very thigh he had dared to slap in arrogance before her. These vows became the silent fire that kept the Pandavas alive through the years of hardship. During their exile, they also encountered sage Vyasa, who guided them with prophetic words. He told them that the forest was not their punishment, but their preparation. The Kauravas rule in pride, he said, but pride is the shadow of downfall. When the time comes, you shall rise not as kings returning to thrones, but as warriors chosen by destiny to restore balance to the world. Toward the end of their 12th year, the Pandavas came to the hermitage of the great sage Damya, who blessed them for their coming trial, the final year of disguise. According to the terms of their exile, they had to live that 13th year in complete concealment, unrecognized by any man. If discovered, they would be forced to return to the forest for another 12 years. Thus began their next chapter of endurance, not through isolation, but through hidden strength. That night, as they prepared to leave the forest behind, Draupadi looked up at the starlit sky and spoke softly. "We entered this forest as kings and leave as wanderers, yet I feel that something greater awaits us. Perhaps the gods themselves walk beside us, shaping our path." Yudhishthira nodded, his gaze calm and distant. "Yes," he said, "fate is not cruel, it is precise. What we endure now is the forging of our souls for the fire that is yet to come." And so, after 13 long years of struggle, learning, and silent preparation, the Pandavas stepped once again toward their destiny. Ahead of them lay the kingdom of Matsya, where they would live in disguise. Beyond that awaited the greatest storm of all, the Kurukshetra War, a war that would decide not only who ruled the earth, but what Dharma itself truly meant. The year of hiding. Disguises in the kingdom of Matsya. When the 12 years of exile ended, a fragile hope returned to the hearts of the Pandavas. Yet the vow of their banishment was not yet complete. The 13th year, the final test, demanded that they live in disguise, unrecognized by any soul. If even one of them was discovered, they would be forced to spend another 12 long years in the wilderness. This was not merely a test of endurance, but of cunning, humility, and restraint. Their glory as princes and warriors had to vanish. Their pride had to be concealed beneath ordinary faces. The place they chose for this hidden year was the kingdom of Matsya, ruled by King Virata, a noble and generous monarch, respected throughout Aryavarta for his fairness and strength. As they approached the borders of Matsya, the Pandavas stood together beneath the wide sky, the forest behind them and destiny ahead. Yudhishthira, calm as ever, looked upon his brothers and Draupadi with a quiet sense of resolve. "This is our final trial," he said. "If we can conquer our egos and live unseen, then justice will come to us in its own time. But if pride betrays us, we will lose everything once more." Each of them then devised a disguise that would allow them to live in King Virata's court without suspicion. Yudhishthira took the name Kanka, becoming a learned Brahmin and court advisor, known for his wisdom in dice and dharma. Bhima disguised himself as Vallabha, a powerful but humble cook who served in the royal kitchens, known for his extraordinary appetite and strength. Arjuna, in perhaps the most striking transformation, assumed the identity of Brihanala, a eunuch dance teacher who would instruct the Princess Antara in music and the arts. Nakula became Granthika, a caretaker of horses, while Sahadeva took the role of Tantipala, the keeper of cattle. Draupadi, their queen, disguised herself as Sairandrai, a servant woman skilled in hairdressing and cosmetics, serving under Queen Sudeshna, King Virata's wife. The first days in Matsya passed with caution. Each of them had to master the art of living without revealing their true nature. Yudhishthira spoke with gentle wisdom, but carefully avoided any topic that could expose his royal past. Bhima's enormous strength drew curiosity, yet he explained it away as the result of years of cooking and grinding grain. Arjuna, veiled in silken robes and delicate ornaments, transformed completely. His grace as a dancer concealed the warrior within. Nakula's love for horses won the trust of the royal stables, while Sahadeva's knowledge of cattle earned him respect among the herdsmen. Draupadi, though humble in appearance, carried an inner fire that never dimmed. Life in disguise was a strange experience for them all. For the first time, they lived not as kings and warriors, but as servants and workers. Yet this humility taught them something new, the value of quiet strength and patience. They learned how the world looked from below the thrones they once ruled. They saw how ordinary people lived, loved, and suffered, and in that they found a deeper connection to their own humanity. However, even in disguise, destiny had not forgotten them. One day, Kikaka, the powerful and arrogant brother of Queen Sudeshna, noticed Draupadi. Bewitched by her beauty, he began to pursue her with cruel persistence. Draupadi, terrified and humiliated, sought protection from Yudhishthira, but he reminded her that any open action could risk revealing their identities. Torn between fear and pride, she endured his advances until one night, Kikaka's violence went too far. He tried to force himself upon her in the royal hall, and Draupadi ran weeping to Bhima's quarters. That night, Draupadi and Bhima plotted a plan that would end Kikaka's tyranny. Draupadi sent word to Kikaka, pretending to agree to meet him secretly in the dancing hall. When he arrived, expecting a tryst, he found not the delicate Sairandri, but the mighty Bhima waiting in the shadows. What followed was a battle of fury. Bhima struck Kikaka with such force that the man's body was crushed like clay beneath his hands. When the guards discovered Kikaka's shattered form, Draupadi stood before them with calm fire in her eyes and said, "The one who tried to dishonor me was destroyed by his own arrogance." From that night, no man in Matsya dared look upon her with impure intent. The death of Kikaka, however, stirred whispers throughout the kingdom. His kin suspected that a powerful warrior was hiding among them. Draupadi feared that their secret might soon be discovered, but Yudhishthira reassured her, saying, "Even truth must sometimes wear a disguise until the time for revelation arrives." As months passed, the Pandavas continued their hidden lives. Arjuna, as Brahmanala, formed a close bond with Princess Atara, teaching her dance, grace, and composure. Yet within him, the warrior's fire still burned, restrained only by the promise of patience. Bhima's temper remained ever at the edge, but his loyalty to Draupadi and his brothers kept him disciplined. Yudhishthira played his role flawlessly, using his wisdom to help King Virata rule justly, all while ensuring that no word or gesture betrayed who he truly was. But fate, ever restless, soon brought new challenges. Far away, the Kauravas, growing suspicious, began to wonder where the Pandavas had gone. Duryodhana, restless with paranoia, ordered spies to search every kingdom. He suspected that his cousins were not dead, but hiding somewhere, waiting for the right time to strike. When his scouts returned with rumors of strange, powerful servants in the court of Matsya, he smiled coldly and began to plan. Meanwhile, trouble loomed at the borders of Matsya. The Tragarta kingdom, allied with the Kauravas, launched an attack on Virata's lands, seizing cattle and threatening war. With most of the Matsya army away on another campaign, panic spread through the palace. King Virata, desperate, turned to his court for help. It was then that Brihanala, Arjuna in disguise, stepped forward, his soft voice carrying hidden strength. He offered to train the young Prince Atara, the king's son, to ride into battle. Reluctantly, the king agreed, never suspecting that this gentle dance teacher was one of the greatest warriors to ever live. As they rode toward the battlefield, the prince trembled with fear at the sight of the enemy's army. Arjuna, smiling calmly, revealed his true identity to him. He threw off the silks of Brihanala and took up his Gandiva bow once more. The prince fell to his knees in awe as divine light surrounded Arjuna. "I am Arjuna of the Pandavas," he said. "The gods have hidden me here until this moment." The prince, filled with new courage, became his charioteer. What followed was a display of divine power. Alone, Arjuna faced the armies of Trigarta and the Kauravas, driving them into retreat with his unmatched skill. Arrows rained like lightning, and the earth shook under his might. The enemy fled, unable to comprehend how one warrior could defeat an entire host. When they returned victorious, King Virata was overjoyed, but his pride was quickly humbled when Yudhishthira revealed who they truly were. The revelation stunned the court. The men they had known as servants were, in truth, the exiled kings of Hastinapura. King Virata bowed deeply before them, apologizing for any indignities they had suffered, and offered his daughter Atara's hand in marriage to Arjuna. But Arjuna, ever humble, refused, saying that he had been her teacher and could only accept her as a daughter. Instead, he proposed that she marry his son, Abhimanyu, the son of Subhadra, and the nephew of Krishna. Thus ended the year of hiding. The Pandavas had fulfilled their vow without discovery, emerging from concealment stronger, wiser, and more resolute than ever. The years of exile had tempered them like steel, teaching them patience, humility, and the quiet power of endurance. Now, as they looked toward the horizon, they knew that the time for peace was over. The drums of destiny were beginning to sound, and the war of Kurukshetra, the great reckoning of Dharma and Adharma, was drawing near. That night, under the open sky, Yudhishthira whispered a prayer to the wind. The forest taught us endurance. The disguise taught us restraint. Now may the battlefield teach the world what truth truly means. The stars above shimmered like silent witnesses, knowing that soon the fate of the entire world would be decided on the plains of Kurukshetra. The road to Kurukshetra, Krishna's counsel, and the call to war, when the 13th year of exile finally came to an end. The Pandavas emerged from their disguises not as broken men, but as tempered steel, stronger, wiser, and ready to face their destiny. They had endured the wilderness, the humiliation of loss, and the silence of obscurity. Now the time had come to reclaim what was rightfully theirs, not out of vengeance or pride, but out of justice and dharma. Yet even as they prepared to return to the world of kings and courts, they hoped that peace, and not bloodshed, would be the path ahead. Yudhishthira, whose patience had been tested like no others, was the first to speak of reconciliation. He believed that war, once begun, would consume not only their enemies, but the very soul of Bharat itself. Sitting beside the fire one evening, surrounded by his brothers and Draupadi, he said in a calm voice that carried both sadness and wisdom, "The dice that once robbed us of our kingdom also taught us restraint. We have suffered enough, and the world has seen our endurance. Let us now seek peace first. If Duryodhana will grant us only that which is ours, then the earth need not drink the blood of kin." His brothers listened in silence. Bhima clenched his fists, unable to forget the humiliation Draupadi had endured in Hastinapura's hall. Arjuna, thoughtful as always, gazed into the flickering fire, torn between duty and the fear of inevitable destruction. Nakula and Sahadeva, calm but resolute, supported Yudhishthira's decision. Even Draupadi, though her heart burned with memory, bowed her head in agreement. And so it was decided that a peaceful request would be sent to Hastinapura, a plea not for power, but for fairness. The message carried by the envoys was simple and just. The sons of Pandu asked only for the share of their inheritance that was due to them. But if that too was denied, they would have no choice but to fight. When the message reached Hastinapura, the Kaurava court gathered to hear it. The elders, Bhishma, Drona, Kripa, and Vidura, listened with heavy hearts, knowing the righteousness of the Pandavas' claim. But Duryodhana's arrogance had grown too vast to be moved by reason. With a cruel smile, he dismissed the envoy and declared before all, "Not even the amount of land that can be covered by the tip of a needle shall I give them. Let them come and take it by force if they dare." Those words, sharp and final, echoed through the marble halls of Hastinapura. They were words that shut the door to peace and opened the gates to war. When the Pandavas received the reply, a heavy silence fell over their camp. Yudhishthira bowed his head, his heart heavy with sorrow, while Bhima rose in fury, his voice thunderous as he vowed that the injustice done to Draupadi would be avenged. Arjuna remained still, his expression unreadable, caught between the warrior's duty and the human dread of fratricide. It was then that Krishna, the divine guide and friend, stepped forward. His presence, as always, brought both calm and clarity. "There is one last path we must try," he said. "Let me go as your messenger of peace. Let me speak to Duryodhana and his court. If my words cannot awaken reason, then the war they crave shall consume them entirely." The brothers agreed, and Krishna set out for Hastinapura. When he arrived, the Kaurava court was filled with kings and counselors, their faces divided between pride and fear. Krishna entered the great hall with humility, but carried within him the power of the divine. His voice, calm yet commanding, filled the air. "O sons of Kuru," he said, "I come not with threats, but with truth. The Pandavas have suffered greatly, yet they ask only for what is right. Grant them their share, and the land will prosper in peace. Refuse, and the world will burn. The blood spilled in such a war will not only stain the soil, but the souls of all who fight." For a moment, silence filled the hall. Many elders lowered their heads, their hearts trembling with the weight of his words. Bhishma and Drona supported peace. Vidura wept quietly. And even the blind King Dhritarashtra felt the fear of what was coming. But Duryodhana, seated upon his throne, could not bear Krishna's calm authority. His pride was a poison that had long corrupted him. With defiance in his voice, he said, "You speak of peace, Krishna, but you come to steal my power. The Pandavas have no right to even a village. Let them live as beggars. I will not yield a single grain of land." Krishna looked upon him with both pity and disappointment. "You are blind not by birth, Duryodhana, but by choice. You see only yourself, and that blindness will destroy you." When the tension in the hall grew, and Duryodhana even ordered his guards to seize Krishna, the Divine One simply smiled. The moment his name was called in anger, the light of the cosmos filled the court. Krishna revealed his Vishvarupa, his universal form, a blinding vision of creation and destruction itself. The kings and warriors present saw in him the stars, the oceans, the gods, and the very fire of time. His voice thundered like the roar of eternity. "You cannot bind me, for I am the infinite. But know this, war is now inevitable, for you have chosen it with your own arrogance." When the light faded, silence reigned. The elders bowed their heads, tears in their eyes, for they knew the doom of their lineage had been sealed. After Krishna's departure, Dhritarashtra called for his counselors in desperation. "Can nothing be done?" he asked. Vidura, ever honest, replied, "Your son has made his choice, O king. No counsel can turn him now. The wheel of fate has begun to turn, and its motion will not stop until the field of Kurukshetra is soaked in blood." And so, preparations for war began across the land. The great kingdoms of Bharat chose their sides. The Pandavas' cause drew noble allies: Drupada of Panchala, Virata of Matsya, the Yadavas of Dwarka under Krishna, and others who believed in righteousness. The Kauravas, however, gathered immense power with Bhishma as their commander, Drona as their teacher, Karna as their champion, and Shakuni as their schemer. The drums of destiny began to beat, echoing through villages and cities alike. Before the war could begin, one final choice had to be made, and it would define the course of everything that followed. Both Arjuna and Duryodhana, seeking Krishna's support, traveled to Dwarka. They arrived on the same day and entered Krishna's chamber where he slept. Duryodhana, proud and impatient, sat near Krishna's head. Arjuna, humble and reverent, stood near his feet. When Krishna awoke, his eyes first fell upon Arjuna, and he greeted him warmly. Both men expressed their desire for Krishna's aid in the war. Smiling, Krishna offered them a choice. "One of you may have my vast Narayan army, powerful and unmatched. The other may have me, but unarmed, bearing no weapon, and bound by my promise not to fight." Duryodhana, blinded by greed and the illusion of power, immediately chose Krishna's army, believing that numbers would ensure victory. Arjuna, on the other hand, bowed his head and said softly, "And I choose you, my lord, for where you are, righteousness itself stands." "I seek not numbers, but truth," Krishna smiled gently. "Then I shall be your charioteer," he said. "I will not fight, but I will guide. The world shall witness what happens when Dharma rides with devotion." Thus, the sides were chosen, and the lines of destiny were drawn. The brothers of Pandu prepared their forces, and across the plains of Kurukshetra, tents rose like a sea of determination. The air grew thick with tension, the earth heavy with the weight of fate. The day was coming when brother would face brother, when teacher would fight student, and when the very concept of Dharma would be tested by the fires of war. As the sun sank beneath the horizon, Krishna stood beside Arjuna and looked toward the distant fields where the armies would soon gather. "The time of words is over," he said quietly. "Now begins the time of truth." The fall of heroes. As dawn broke over the war-ravaged fields of Kurukshetra, the 11th day of battle gave way to a new chapter of blood, strategy, and sorrow. The once vibrant land that had echoed with the chants of warriors now trembled under the weight of destruction. The air was heavy with dust, the cries of soldiers, and the smell of smoke rising from broken chariots. The war that began as a fight for justice had now become a storm of vengeance. Each passing day, the ground drank more blood, and every sunset seemed to weep for the heroes who would never see another dawn. Yet, in the heart of this chaos, duty and honor still guided the hands of warriors who knew that death was inevitable but glory eternal. On the 11th day, Bhishma, the grandsire, still led the Kaurava army, his arrows cutting through the sky like lightning. His strength seemed unstoppable, and even the greatest warriors of the Pandavas trembled before him. No one dared to stand directly against him, because he was blessed with the boon of choosing his moment of death. However, Krishna knew that this war could not be won unless Bhishma was defeated. That night, under the quiet sky, the Pandavas gathered in their camp, faces tired and hearts heavy. Yudhishthira, filled with both reverence and despair, asked Krishna how they could defeat the man they all loved and respected like a grandfather. Krishna, with calm wisdom in his voice, revealed the painful truth. Bhishma has vowed not to raise arms against a woman. Only by placing someone before him who is neither man nor woman can he be defeated. At first, the brothers were silent, not understanding what Krishna meant. Then Arjuna's eyes widened in realization. He remembered Shikhandi, born as a woman but later transformed into a man, carrying the past life of Princess Amba, who had once vowed to destroy Bhishma. Krishna's strategy was clear. Shikhandi would stand before Bhishma, and Arjuna would fight from behind. The next morning, as the sun rose, Bhishma appeared on the battlefield with divine light radiating around him. He knew his end was near, but faced it with the dignity of a true warrior. When Shikhandi confronted him, Bhishma lowered his bow, true to his vow. In that moment of vulnerability, Arjuna's arrows pierced through the air, striking the grandsire's body. Bhishma fell not like a defeated man, but like a tree of wisdom, gently laying itself down to rest. His body, pierced by countless arrows, did not touch the ground. It rested upon the very weapons that had brought his fall. As he lay on the bed of arrows, Bhishma's calm face reflected peace rather than pain. He asked for water, and Arjuna, filled with tears, shot an arrow into the earth, bringing forth a cool stream that touched his grandfather's lips. Bhishma blessed Arjuna for his devotion and declared that he would remain alive until the sun moved northward, waiting for the right moment to leave his body. With Bhishma's fall, a chapter of righteousness ended. Even the Kauravas bowed their heads in grief, for though he had fought for their side, his heart had always belonged to truth. With Bhishma gone, Dronacharya took command of the Kaurava army. The 13th day brought new horrors as Drona's strategies became ruthless. He created a deadly formation known as the Chakravyuha, a spiraling maze that only Arjuna knew how to enter and exit. But fate played its cruel hand. Arjuna was drawn away to another part of the battlefield. His son, Abhimanyu, brave and young, volunteered to enter the formation to protect the Pandava army. With his father's teachings and unmatched courage, Abhimanyu broke through the first circles of the formation, fighting with divine strength. But once inside, the Kaurava warriors closed in, trapping him. Surrounded by mighty warriors like Drona, Karna, and Duryodhana's brothers, the young prince fought valiantly, his bowstring snapping again and again. When his chariot broke, he fought with a sword. When his sword shattered, he fought with a wheel. And when everything was taken from him, he fought with his bare hands. But the cruel truth of war prevailed. Abhimanyu was slain mercilessly, his body falling amid the dust of Kurukshetra. When news of Abhimanyu's death reached Arjuna, he stood silent for a moment, his heart breaking into pieces. The mighty warrior, who had faced countless enemies, now trembled with grief. Then his sorrow turned to fury, and he vowed before the setting sun that he would slay Jayadratha, the man who had blocked Abhimanyu's escape before the next sunset or end his own life. The next day, Arjuna became unstoppable. His chariot blazed across the battlefield, arrows flying like waves of fire. The Kauravas surrounded Jayadratha, determined to protect him, but destiny cannot be delayed. As the sun dipped below the horizon, it seemed that Arjuna's vow would fail. Duryodhana laughed, thinking victory was theirs. But then Krishna revealed his divine power. He had hidden the sun with his illusion. The light returned, and Arjuna, in a single flash of divine focus, released an arrow that struck Jayadratha down. The war raged on, but with each passing day, hearts grew heavier. The 13th and 14th days were filled with vengeance. Drona's rage at losing his students and comrades made him cruel. He unleashed the Brahmastra, divine weapons that scorched the earth. In the chaos, Krishna whispered to Yudhishthira to end Drona's madness by breaking his spirit. They spread the word that his son Ashwathama had been slain. When Drona heard this, his bow slipped from his hands, and he sat down in silent despair. In that moment, Drishtadyumna, son of Drupada, took his revenge and killed the great teacher. Another pillar of the old world had fallen. The night that followed was one of darkness and madness. Gatotkacha, Bhima's mighty son, entered the battlefield, his demonic power shaking the earth. The Kauravas feared him, for his strength grew under the moonlight. Karna, forced to use his celestial weapon, the Shakti, finally brought down Gatotkacha, but in doing so, he lost the only weapon that could have killed Arjuna. The Pandavas mourned the fallen hero, but Krishna smiled faintly, for destiny had turned in their favor. The war was no longer a fight of right and wrong. It had become a storm of fate, sweeping everyone toward their end. Each death was a lesson, each battle a test of the soul. The heroes who once stood as symbols of strength were now shadows moving toward their destiny. And yet, through all the pain and loss, one truth remained unshaken. In the heart of the Mahabharata, every act of destruction carried within it the seed of renewal. The end was near, but so too was the dawn of wisdom that would rise from the ashes of Kurukshetra. The twilight of war. The sun rose on the 17th day of the great war with a strange stillness, as if the very heavens hesitated to witness what was to come. The battlefield of Kurukshetra, once filled with thousands of warriors shouting war cries, now lay blanketed in a haunting silence, disturbed only by the groans of the wounded and the distant cry of vultures circling above. The mighty armies that had begun with such pride and numbers were now reduced to weary remnants. The ground was no longer soil, but a mix of ashes, broken weapons, and blood. The once proud flags of both the Pandavas and Kauravas were torn and burned, fluttering weakly in the hot wind. Every warrior left standing carried not only the weight of his armor, but also the grief of losing countless brothers and friends. The fall of Bhishma, Drona, and Karna had shaken both sides to their core. The Kauravas, though still holding on to their pride, had begun to realize that their defeat was near. Yet Duryodhana refused to surrender. His ego and thirst for vengeance burned brighter than reason itself. He believed that as long as he stood, Hastinapura still belonged to him. Across the field, the Pandavas prepared for what would likely be the final clash. Yudhishthira, ever noble, prayed silently for peace, even as he commanded his troops. Bhima, his eyes blazing with fury, waited for the moment he could face Duryodhana once and for all. Arjuna, his heart heavy from the deaths of his son Abhimanyu and his teacher Drona, remained silent, his bow Gandiva resting in his hands like an extension of his own soul. And Krishna, the charioteer of destiny, looked upon the battlefield with calm understanding, for he knew that this day would mark the turning point of the age itself. Before the battle began, the wind shifted hot, dry, and restless, as though the gods themselves were holding their breath. On the Kaurava side, only a few of the mighty warriors remained. Duryodhana, Kripa, Ashwathama, Shalya, and Kritavarma. Karna, their greatest hope, had fallen the previous day, struck down by Arjuna after a battle that shook the earth itself. When Karna's body had fallen, even Arjuna had lowered his bow in sorrow. Krishna had told him gently, "You have not killed a man, Arjuna, but released a soul that was bound to fate. Karna was born to suffer for his loyalty and pride. You have only fulfilled what destiny had written long ago." Now, with Karna gone, Duryodhana's heart burned with grief and rage. He blamed everyone, the gods, fate, and even his own allies, but never himself. That morning, he rode across the battlefield like a wounded lion, his chariot broken, his face covered with dust and blood. Standing before his remaining army, he roared, "I am still alive. I am the son of Dhritarashtra, the rightful king of Hastinapura. Let any man among the Pandavas come and face me if he dares." His voice echoed across the wasteland, carried by the wind to the ears of Bhima, who was waiting for this very moment. Bhima's lips curved into a grim smile. The time had come to fulfill his vow to break Duryodhana's thigh as punishment for the insult to Draupadi. As the final duel was arranged, the sun began to descend, casting long golden shadows across the land. Krishna watched silently as Bhima and Duryodhana faced each other, their bodies gleaming with sweat and armor. Both warriors circled each other like tigers, the ground trembling beneath their feet. Duryodhana fought with unmatched skill, for he was trained in the art of mace fighting by the best masters. Bhima, though stronger, struggled to match Duryodhana's speed and precision. The sound of their maces colliding echoed like thunder. Sparks flew. Each strike carried the weight of years of hatred, jealousy, and pride. The warriors around them watched in awe and silence, for this was not just a battle between two men. It was the battle between justice and arrogance, between dharma and ego. As the duel stretched on, Duryodhana seemed to gain the upper hand. He moved swiftly, landing blow after blow on Bhima's armor. Krishna, observing the fight, leaned toward Arjuna and whispered, "Bhima fights with rage, but Duryodhana fights with discipline. If this continues, the Pandavas will lose." Then, as Bhima staggered, Krishna raised his hand ever so slightly, signaling him. Bhima understood. The next moment, as Duryodhana leapt to strike, Bhima fainted and with all his strength brought his mace crashing down upon Duryodhana's thigh, the very place where he had sworn vengeance. The crack of bone echoed through the air like a curse fulfilled. Duryodhana fell to the ground, crying out in agony. The battlefield fell silent. Yudhishthira turned away, unable to watch. Arjuna and Nakula lowered their heads in sadness, for though Duryodhana had been their enemy, he was still a warrior of noble birth. Now, lying broken on the earth, he had fought to rule. As Duryodhana writhed in pain, he glared at Bhima and spat, "You have struck me below the waist. It is against the code of warriors." Bhima said nothing, but Krishna's voice rose calm yet powerful. "Duryodhana, you speak of codes and honor, yet you forgot them when you humiliated Draupadi in the court, when you conspired to burn your cousins alive, when you stood by as Abhimanyu was slaughtered. The wheel of karma has turned, and now you face its end." The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky crimson, as if the heavens themselves mourned the fall of the mighty. That night, the battlefield was quiet, but peace was nowhere to be found. While the Pandavas rested, thinking the war was over, darkness crept into the hearts of the defeated. Ashwathama, the son of Drona, burned with revenge. He could not bear the thought that his father, his mentor, and his friends had all perished. As the stars shone coldly above, he gathered Kripa and Kritavarma, whispering words of vengeance. The three slipped silently into the sleeping camp of the Pandavas. In the shadows, Ashwathama unleashed his fury, slaughtering the sons of the Pandavas in their tents, mistaking them for their fathers. By dawn, the once quiet camp had become a place of horror. When the Pandavas awoke to the cries of the survivors, they discovered the lifeless bodies of their children. Draupadi's screams of grief echoed through the air, piercing every heart. Yudhishthira stood frozen, his eyes filled with sorrow deeper than any wound. Bhima clenched his fists, trembling with rage. Arjuna's eyes burned as he swore vengeance once again, not for pride this time, but for love, for the innocent lives lost. The war had ended, but the cycle of pain had not. Krishna, standing beside them, spoke softly. The age of warriors is dying. What remains is the test of forgiveness. This world will not heal through more bloodshed, but through understanding. Yet the hearts of men were still bound to fire, and the story of vengeance was not yet finished. As the final stars of that night faded, the battlefield of Kurukshetra lay still at last. The mighty had fallen, the innocent had suffered, and destiny had fulfilled its cruel promise. But even amidst the ashes, a faint light of wisdom began to rise, whispering that every end, no matter how tragic, carries within it the seed of a new beginning. The Mahabharata's war was ending, but its lessons were only beginning to unfold. The aftermath of war and the curse of Ashwathama, the dawn that followed the final night of the Great War, did not bring peace. It brought silence. A silence so heavy that even the wind seemed afraid to move. The battlefield of Kurukshetra, which had once thundered with the roars of warriors and the clash of steel, was now a wasteland of broken chariots, fallen banners, and lifeless bodies. The earth, soaked with the blood of kings and heroes, stood as a reminder of the price of pride and the futility of vengeance. Crows circled the air, and jackals howled in the distance, as if the very creatures of the land were mourning the end of an age. The Pandavas stood amidst this devastation, not as victors basking in glory, but as men hollowed by loss. Their faces bore the weariness of battle, but their eyes carried something far heavier, the sorrow of survival. Yudhishthira, the eldest of the Pandavas, looked across the ruined land and whispered, "We have won the kingdom, but at what cost? The sons of Dhritarashtra are gone. Our children are gone. Our teachers and elders are gone. There is no joy left in victory." His brothers said nothing, for his words echoed the truth in each of their hearts. Bhima, whose strength had once shaken mountains, now stood silently, his mace resting at his side. Arjuna stared into the distance, his bow Gandiva lowered, remembering the countless faces that had fallen to his arrows. Nakula and Sahadeva, the youngest, looked toward the sky as if searching for answers among the clouds. And Draupadi, her heart shattered by the loss of her sons, sat in quiet grief, her tears falling onto the dust of the earth. The survivors gathered to perform the final rites for the dead. The sacred chants of the priests rose softly over the burning pyres, blending with the sound of the wind. Krishna stood beside Yudhishthira, his calm presence offering the only sense of peace in a world torn apart. "Yudhishthira," he said gently, "the war was not fought for victory or power. It was fought so that Dharma righteousness might be restored to the world. But even righteousness demands a price. Now is the time not for sorrow, but for healing." Yudhishthira, however, could not accept these words so easily. "How can there be healing," he said, "when the innocent have suffered more than the guilty? How can I sit on a throne built upon ashes?" Krishna placed a hand on his shoulder. "Because," he replied, "it is your duty. The age of war is over. Now begins the age of responsibility. You must lead not as a conqueror, but as a guardian of what remains." But before peace could truly return, one final chapter of vengeance was yet to unfold. Ashwathama, the son of Drona, was still alive, haunted, furious, and consumed by grief for his father's death. Having slain the sons of the Pandavas in the darkness of the night, he had fled into the forests, his mind lost between rage and regret. When Arjuna and Bhima tracked him down, they found not a warrior, but a man tormented by his own deeds. His once bright eyes were wild, his armor rusted, his hair unkempt. Yet even in madness he held on to his pride. When the Pandavas confronted him, he raised his hand and invoked the Brahmashira, the deadliest of all divine weapons, capable of destroying the world itself. Arjuna, too, summoned the same weapon in defense, and the earth trembled as the two divine forces faced each other. Seeing the world on the brink of destruction, the sages and gods themselves intervened. Vyasa, the great sage and author of the Mahabharata, appeared before them, his presence radiating calm and authority. Ashwathama, he thundered, you have already drowned your soul in sin. Do not destroy the world for your vengeance. Withdraw your weapon. But Ashwathama, blinded by fury, could not control the power he had unleashed. Realizing that his weapon could not be recalled, he redirected its energy toward the unborn child of Abhimanyu, the only remaining heir of the Pandava line. In a single flash of divine fire, the curse was cast. The womb of Atara, Abhimanyu's wife, trembled as her child's life was threatened. Krishna, hearing this, closed his eyes. His divine form shone with brilliance, and in that moment he intervened to protect the innocent. With his celestial power, he entered Atara's womb and shielded the unborn child from destruction. Thus, the child Parikshit was saved, destined to become the future king who would continue the line of the Pandavas. As for Ashwathama, his fate was sealed. Vyasa cursed him to wander the earth forever, his body bearing the wound of his sin, unable to die and unable to find peace. The jewel that had adorned his forehead, granting him strength and protection, was taken from him. Stripped of his pride and condemned to eternal loneliness, Ashwathama became a shadow, a reminder of the destruction that unchecked anger and vengeance can bring. With the war truly over and vengeance exhausted, the Pandavas returned to Hastinapura. The city that had once been filled with laughter and life now felt like an empty shell. The citizens welcomed them as kings, but their joy was subdued, for everyone had lost someone in the great war. Dhritarashtra and Gandhari, grieving the deaths of their 100 sons, awaited the Pandavas with heavy hearts. When Yudhishthira approached them to seek forgiveness, Dhritarashtra embraced him, but in his grief, his hands trembled with suppressed anger. Krishna, sensing the danger, guided Bhima to stand in Yudhishthira's place for a moment, and Dhritarashtra, blinded by sorrow, crushed a metal statue in his arms, mistaking it for Bhuma. Realizing what he had done, the old king broke down in tears. Gandhari, too, wept bitterly, her eyes covered by the same cloth she had worn in loyalty to her husband's blindness. Her sorrow turned to wrath, and she cursed Krishna himself, declaring that just as her sons had perished, the Yadava dynasty, Krishna's own clan, would one day destroy itself from within. Krishna accepted the curse with serenity, knowing it was part of the divine plan. Mother, he said softly, your words shall come true, for even divine beings must face the end of their time. Nothing born on this earth can escape the cycle of birth and death. His calm acceptance of her curse silenced all who stood there. Gandhari, realizing the depth of his understanding, finally lowered her head and wept for all that had been lost. The coronation of Yudhishthira followed soon after. The sacred waters were poured upon his head, and he was crowned king of Hastinapura. The people rejoiced, but Yudhishthira himself found no joy in the ceremony. His thoughts wandered to those who had fallen: Bhishma, Drona, Karna, Abhimanyu, and countless others who had perished in the name of duty and pride. On Krishna's advice, Yudhishthira visited Bhishma, who still lay on his bed of arrows, waiting for the sun to move northward. There, the grandsire imparted his final wisdom teachings of kingship, morality, and the eternal nature of the soul. His words became the foundation of what would later be known as the Shanti Parva, the Book of Peace. When the time came, Bhishma looked toward the rising sun, smiled, and breathed his last, his soul merging with the eternal light. The war was over, but its echoes lingered in every heart, every ruin, every silence that followed. Hastinapura stood rebuilt, yet scarred forever. The age of heroes had ended, and a quieter, wiser world began to emerge from the ashes. The Pandavas had fulfilled their duty, but they knew their time on earth was drawing to a close. The world would move on, and new stories would be written, but the lessons of Kurukshetra would remain eternal. The end of an era and the departure of the Pandavas' years passed after the war of Kurukshetra, and the great kingdom of Hastinapura slowly began to heal. Under King Yudhishthira's rule, the land prospered once more. The fields bloomed again, the rivers ran clear, and the cries of war were replaced by the songs of peace. Temples were rebuilt, the people returned to their homes, and for the first time in what felt like centuries, the air carried the scent of calm. Yet, even amidst prosperity, the weight of memory hung heavy upon the hearts of the Pandavas. For though they had restored dharma, righteousness, to the world, their souls had been scarred by the blood that had been spilled to achieve it. Yudhishthira ruled wisely, guided by the lessons of his elders and the counsel of Krishna. But in quiet moments he would look out toward the horizon and wonder if victory built upon death could ever truly be called victory. The years brought both joy and sorrow. Under the Pandavas' care, the child Parikshit, son of Abhimanyu, grew into a strong and wise prince. He carried the hopes of the dynasty within him, and his very presence brought comfort to his elders. Draupadi, the queen whose dignity and courage had sparked the fire of the great war, lived in quiet grace, her heart forever divided between pride and pain. Krishna often visited Hastinapura, his presence a reminder that the divine still walked among men. Every time he came, the court seemed to glow with life, and even the heaviest burdens felt lighter. Yet, as the years passed, a faint shadow began to creep into his eyes, an unspoken knowledge that his time in the mortal world was nearing its end. One evening, as the golden light of the setting sun filled the palace, Krishna called the Pandavas together. His voice, though calm as ever, carried a note of finality. "My dear friends," he said softly, "the age we have lived in is coming to a close. The cycle of time moves forward, and soon the world will enter a new age, Kali Yuga, the age of darkness. The Yadavas, my own kin, have become proud and reckless. Their end is near, just as Gandhari foretold. When I leave this world, your time here too will draw to its destined conclusion." The Pandavas listened in silence, unable to speak. They had fought beside Krishna, laughed with him, and sought his guidance through every storm. The thought of a world without him filled them with a sorrow deeper than any battle could bring. Not long after, Krishna's words came true. In his city of Dwaraka, pride and anger had grown among the Yadavas. A quarrel broke out among them during a feast, and in a frenzy of rage, they turned their weapons upon one another. The city that had once shone like a jewel by the sea became a field of ruin. Krishna, witnessing the destruction of his people, knew the end had come. He retreated into the forest and sat beneath a peepal tree, his eyes closing in serene acceptance. A hunter named Jara, mistaking Krishna's resting form for that of a deer, shot an arrow that pierced his foot. As the hunter ran to him in horror, Krishna smiled gently and said, "Do not grieve. This is the way destiny unfolds." With calm and grace, he released his mortal body, his divine essence merging back into eternity. The world trembled, for with his departure, the light of the Vapara Yuga faded, and the age of Kali began. When the Pandavas heard the news of Krishna's passing, they were overcome with grief. The man who had been their guide, protector, and friend was gone, and with him, the last thread that tied them to the world of the living seemed to break. Yudhishthira called his brothers and Draupadi together and spoke quietly, his voice heavy with emotion. "Our purpose here is fulfilled. We have ruled, we have restored Dharma, and we have paid the price that fate demanded. It is time to lay down the burdens of this world and seek the path beyond." The others listened, their eyes glistening with understanding. Bhima's heart, once filled with fire, now beat with calm acceptance. Arjuna, whose bow had defended the world, felt his strength fading, as if even Gandiva longed for rest. Nakula and Sahadeva, ever loyal and pure, bowed their heads in silent agreement. Draupadi, serene and dignified, smiled faintly, knowing the time had come to follow her husbands on their final journey. They crowned Parikshit as the new king of Hastinapura, entrusting the future of the kingdom to his care. Then, dressed in simple robes and carrying no weapons, the Pandavas and Draupadi set out toward the Himalayas. The people wept as they watched their rulers depart, but Yudhishthira raised his hand and said, "Do not grieve. Every soul must follow its path. Rule with kindness, live with truth, and remember that nothing in this world is eternal." Their journey was not one of conquest, but of release. Step by step, they climbed higher into the mountains, leaving behind the noise of the world. The air grew thinner, the earth colder, but their hearts were light. Along the way, one by one, the companions fell. First went Draupadi, her body unable to bear the climb. Bhima looked back, tears in his eyes, and asked his elder brother, "Why has she fallen, O king?" Yudhishthira answered gently, "Because though she was noble, she loved Arjuna more than the others. Each of us carries our own attachment, and it is that which weighs the soul." Then, one after another, Sahadeva, Nakula, Arjuna, and Bhima too fell upon the path, their bodies returning to the earth, their spirits rising toward the heavens. Each fall was met not with grief, but with understanding, for Yudhishthira knew that the journey of life must end with the shedding of all worldly ties. At last, Yudhishthira alone continued, his loyal companion, a stray dog, walking beside him. When he reached the gates of heaven, Indra appeared before him in his celestial chariot and said, "O king, you are pure and worthy. Enter heaven alive, for no man has ever done so before." But Yudhishthira shook his head. "I cannot enter," he said, "without this faithful creature who has walked beside me till the end." Indra smiled and said, "No mortal can enter heaven with a dog." Yet Yudhishthira refused to abandon his companion. "If this is heaven, it cannot demand that I forsake loyalty. I would rather remain here than enter alone." At that moment, the dog transformed into the god Dharma, Yudhishthira's divine father, who said with pride, "You have passed the final test, my son. Compassion and righteousness are greater than all victory. Enter heaven now, for you have truly lived by Dharma." When Yudhishthira entered the realm of the gods, he found his brothers and Draupadi restored to their divine forms, radiant and free from all sorrow. The heroes who had once walked the earth as men now shone among the stars, their deeds immortalized in time. The war, the pain, the triumph, and the loss, all of it, became part of the eternal rhythm of existence. The great cycle had turned once more, and from the ashes of the old world, new life would eventually rise. And so ended the story of the Pandavas, the sons of destiny, the keepers of Dharma, and the warriors who carried the burden of a world's fate upon their shoulders. Their tale, born of fire and faith, became not just a chronicle of kings and battles, but a mirror of the human soul, its pride, its love, its flaws, and its endless search for truth. The Mahabharata closed not with the clash of weapons, but with the quiet acceptance of eternity. For in the end, every war fades, every kingdom falls, and every life returns to the same infinite peace from which it began.